introduction is.
Right. Yeah. The
Oh,
time and I mean the date and so forth
yeah.
and what in general the subject is. I think that's a good way to start.
Okay.
Helps me sort it out.
All right. Well, it
And
started
don't
out.
and don't hesitate to talk. Ask questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, it is. Let's see, May 2nd, uh, two, 2022, and
Hmm.
the Bill, my big brother, is going to be talking about his uh, his purchase and restoration of a '37 Ford. Anything else you could add to that, Bill?
Nope. You think you nailed it really well.
Okay,
So it's my turn.
it's you. Yeah, it's your turn.
Okay, okay, okay. Um, well, the this 37 Ford, as it evolved, turned out to be a significant part of my life, as it turned out. And like so many things that are significant, I suppose, for most people, certainly it's been my experience, that you didn't know it was what would come of it. Um, I'd always been, well, for a long time, I was interested in mechanical things and cars. Mom and Dad were good enough to give me, I think for birthday, a subscription to Hot Rod magazine. And I just loved reading about those things. But of course, I was poverty stricken at the time. That would probably be high school for me. Uh, but I just enjoyed reading about it and all the really swell things that people did with the cars. And many times they were older cars. A 32 Ford coupe, for example, would be a typical subject of an article in Hot Rod magazine. Um, but one day, wandering around Eugene, I at a gasoline station that wasn't too far away from the University of Oregon campus was this really neat older car. I had no idea what the year was. I wasn't that knowledgeable as of yet, and went over to take a look at it and poke around. It was for sale. Um, it was a 1937 Ford Coupe. And so I was, I believe, out of high school. Now I had graduated from high school and trembling on the brink of going to University of Oregon. Um, and I was quite interested in it. It had a blanket. The upholstery was kind of torn up, but it had a red blanket that was tucked around it to well, it was, I suppose, an interest to sell the vehicle and make it look as good as they could. They wanted $95 for it. And I
Mhm.
suppose today $95 sounds like lunch, I suppose, but $95 for a starving former high school student was a lot of money. And but I was really drawn to it. It had a flathead. It was the original engine in it. It was a flathead V8. It had claimed it had 85 horsepower. As I recall, it was like 225 or so cubic inch flathead engine in it. Uh, white uh, white wall tires on it. Um, and I don't remember exactly the process, whether I talked to someone uh, at the service station or whether I phoned somebody or not. But bottom line is that I bought that car and it didn't run. I knew that it didn't run. The engine had been, I think, run without oil in it or something like that, something fairly serious. And so despite that, uh, purchased it and ended up taking it to a garage near the house on Jefferson Street, living at Jefferson Street at the time, of course, and had them pull the engine out and um, and repair it. Again, I don't remember exactly what they did. My recollection is that it was bored out to increase the displacement of the engine, uh, so it was no longer 225, if that's the right number, cubic inches. It was whatever the next step up was, and but I didn't do any other changes. It had the original carburetor on it, and it had uh, uh, this all standard equipment on it. And after what seemed like a terribly long period of time, because probably I was impatient, finally got the car to run. The paint was not very good on it. Never been changed. It was black. Um, it had a rather large cork painted black right above the center of the windshield, and there was this round hole in the near the top of the car. And as I found out later, it was for the antenna, the radio antenna. They changed it and put it, drilled a hole on the side of the cowling right by the windshield, where they put a more normal vertical antenna there. Yes, it had a radio. Of course, it was a vacuum tube radio, and it actually worked. But I couldn't figure out what the heck that hole was until I finally figured out that's where the original antenna went. Oh. There was a knob on the inside that was attached to the antenna on the outside, and you could turn that knob, and the antenna then would rotate down up against the windshield. And I guess to further streamline it, and or you could turn it and get it so it pointed up in the air. And I think the reception should have been better with it upright. There were other mysteries about it. It had mechanical brakes. In 1937, the Fords all had mechanical brakes. They were reluctant. Ford was reluctant to use hydraulic brakes. Other cars, Chevrolets, I think, of that era, were hydraulic brakes. But it turns out that in, I think, 1940, Ford converted over to hydraulic brakes. They were technically superior to mechanical brakes. It was difficult to keep those mechanical brakes tuned up right, so that braking would be applied evenly to all four wheels. The mechanicals would sometimes apply the brake harder on one wheel than another wheel, and it could cause control issues. Hydraulics were always the same pressure to each braking pressure to each of the wheels. Well, it turns out that if you get 1940 brake system, the master cylinder and all that, it would fit. It bolt in. You could take out the old mechanical brakes, and you could bolt in the hydraulic brakes. And so I made that conversion. If I had it to do today, I don't know. I'd almost be tempted to keep all the originals, but converting it to hydraulic brakes was one of the things that I chose to do. And it was quite drivable. Moving on, it parked it in front of the house on the street. There was a one-car garage on the Jefferson Street house, and so I parked on the street. And I don't really remember driving it to college. I don't remember driving it to the University of Oregon, where I spent my first college year. But I did drive it to Corvallis. And I'd come home on weekends. The food was better, and so coming home on weekends was something I really looked forward to. I'm not sure it was the smartest scholastic thing to do, but it was it was something I wanted to do. It was about a 40-mile drive from Eugene uh, to Corvallis.
Hmm.
Down at the bottom of the hill on Jefferson Street, there was a Richfield gasoline station. And right across the street from the Little Big Y, little family market, I guess you could call it, a
Hmm.
grocery store, where we bought our kites and
Yeah.
bought bought popsicles and other important items. But I could put in $1 worth of gasoline into into the Ford, and I could drive all the way. I got enough gasoline. I could drive those 40 miles to Corvallis, and I think I might. I think I could get to Corvallis. I don't think I could get there and back. That would be, roughly an 80-mile round trip. I don't think $1 could get me to go 80 miles, but at least it got me to Corvallis.
Uh-huh.
And I drive on Old Highway 99. It was 99 West, and there was a 99 West and a 99 East, and I normally would drive 99 West. That went right through the middle of Corvallis.
Hmm.
So drive Monday morning to Corvallis Park outside of Mr. Friend's house. Mr. Friend was the landlord where I rented, and actually that first year was rented with Gary Waddington. And Gary had a much newer car. His was, I think, about a 1940 Chevrolet, and he also parked there on the side of the side of the street there. And he would occasionally drive his car to class. He had some classes on the far side of the campus. That's quite a distance. But most of my classes were in the middle or closer. And so I don't think I ever drove the car to class, the Ford to class. No, I don't think I ever did that. One of the first long adventures, maybe it was the only long adventure that I ever took, was it was certainly after my second college year, and I don't remember exactly whether it was second, third, or what, but I took a trip with Dad. Initially, we drove to Denver. We stopped somewhere after leaving Eugene. This would be in the summertime after school was out, but before the cannery would open up, because I would work in the cannery to earn money so I could afford to go pay the tuition and rent and stuff like that. But Dad and I took off from Eugene and headed east, heading initially toward Denver. We went through Salt Lake City, where we stopped for the night at a place called the Bell Motel. And why I remember that name, I have no idea. But it was the Bell Motel, and we stayed there, and then could get to Denver the next day. And we actually were on the road 2 nights. We slept outside. We pulled off the side of the road, back off the highway a little ways, and had sleeping bags, and I slept on the ground. It makes me shudder today to think, there's a variety of critters, snakes come to mind, but it went perfectly well. We got up and the next morning and weren't bitten by anything. And I, at least, had a restful night. At that age, it's maybe a little easier than Dad. I don't remember Dad saying whether he had a restful night or not, but we got into the car and took off. And the next stop was Denver. Excuse me, Salt Lake City, where we had a motel. Probably took a shower. No air conditioning in the Ford, of course, and then continued to motor on toward Denver. Went over a pass. Navigating in those days were on paper. You had maps you get from gas stations, and I took a route that took us over a place called Rabbit Ears Pass. And as I recall, it was very high. For some reason, it seems to me it was up something like 12,000 feet. Now, that seems like an awfully big number, and so I wouldn't bet any money on that. But it was, as I recall, called Rabbit Ears Pass, and up rather high. And at high altitudes, the engines lose quite a bit of power. And it was, I'd never experienced that. All my experience actually up to that time had been in Eugene, and it basically, little above sea level. But at this height of Rabbit Ears Pass, the engine was noticeably less powerful. It was not subtle in the least. And so at the peak, they had a viewpoint or something like that. I know I got out and walked around, stretched my legs. Dad did too, and but also noticed that it was easy to get kind of breathy if you walked too fast or went up any stairs or anything like that. You run out of air at that altitude. At least till you get acclimated to it, we were just passing through. Well, down Rabbit Ears Pass into Denver, and stopped at Uncle Herman and Aunt Selma's house, and spent the night there. They were a neat couple, and certainly they were very gracious, fed us and chatted, and it was a good experience with Herman and Selma. That would be Mom's. Stan, do you know? That's Mom's brother? Do you know?
Yes, Herman. I think
so.
Yes. Yeah.
And but good people, both of them were very, very good and kind and generous. The next day, Dad went to the bus station in Denver to head back to Eugene. I think he had a week off, and travel was not very fast in our days. And I took off for San Antonio, Texas, to visit a friend, Claude Sandell, and his wife, and which was basically straight south, just about straight down from Denver. And Dad was going pretty much straight west to get back home. The drive to San Antonio, I don't remember how long it took me to go there. It seemed like I should have stopped, but I didn't stop in any motels. Again, I was impoverished. So, I do remember one thing about driving in Texas, however, and that is that I bought gas, and I think it was less than 25 cents a gallon. That seems like an incredibly cheap price. Heck, it seemed like an incredibly cheap price at the time. But that's for some reason, that's something that really sticks in my mind. Never to see that again, I bet. But I finally got down to to San Antonio and visited for a few, actually several days with Claude and his wife Barbara. And after they threw me out, got tired of me being around. He was in the Air Force. I should mention that he was in the Air Force, and so I would go on to is Lackland Air Force Base, and he was a lifeguard at one of the swimming pools they had there. So keeping the world safe for democracy, I guess. It always struck me as being funny, but it was kind of fun. I'd go in and splash around in the swimming pool uh, uh, also. Um, but after a few days, oh, and it was very hot. No air conditioning there either. This was summer. This was June, probably late June. Started heading then back west on my return leg to back to home, but stopped at let's see, slept in the car. Um, uh, Blew the top off of the radiator, um, and I don't know why that happened, but it did, and I was able to limp into, I think it's Amarillo. No, 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 not Amarillo. Someplace in New Mexico. I stopped at a uh, uh, radiator shop and had the top soldered back on. It's been fine ever since, by the way. Uh, that's a long time, but that was an exciting adventure. Other than that, was the worst problem I had. I had one flat tire on this trip, and one blew the top off the radiator, and not actually off. It just opened up a seam at the top. And then on into Las Vegas. I'd never seen anything like Las Vegas before, being the simple country lad that I am. But that was really quite spectacular. Went to some of the casinos and wandered around. Didn't gamble. I've never been a gambler, but casinos fascinate the heck out of me. Uh, and then headed toward L.A. Uh, to visit a friend, Fred Millette, and his wife. He was going to school, an artist school in Los Angeles, and visited with them for a couple of nights, as I recall. And Fred and I went to Disneyland, which I knew a little bit about, and that was a magical kingdom. That was wonderful. A trip, the visit to Disneyland. He drove. He was more used to driving in that kind of traffic. And after a couple of days of visiting with Fred and Kay, needed to head back to Eugene. I'd found out that the cannery was just about ready to open up, and I needed to get back to work. So I drove straight from L.A. to Eugene, which was it's a pretty long haul, but finally arrived there without any serious problems, and so ready to go to the next school year. Let's see what else though. Getting more on the car itself. Gosh, maybe that's just about it. Stan, how are we doing on time?
It's a 24-minute recording so far. I was writing down lots of questions as you were talking, so I
Sure,
could
fire away. Fire
probably.
away. I need some help.
Okay, yeah, probably a continuation of where you just left off is that you had the flathead for some reason. I think when you were in the army, the head cracked. It was in storage in Mrs. Golthy's house, and I think the reason you had to have the engine replaced is that it cracked the head, and you replace it with a a Chevy engine, as I recall.
That's right. That's right.
Or, but
Yes.
I may be out of the sequence, maybe completely off, and so
Well,
maybe you
I
could
think
just talk about that.
you're good. No, no. Actually, you're from a chronological viewpoint, you're absolutely right. Um, when I went into the army, I had stored um, um, had stored the Ford in Mrs. Gothi, a lady that lived sort of across the street from the Jefferson Street house, and the engine. I don't think I really stored it very well. That failure could easily be uh, my total responsibility, but still, a hot rod enthusiast, it was an opportunity to replace that flathead V8, the original engine in the Ford, with a 1950 to 57, I think, engine that I bought in Cottage Grove, a junkyard in Cottage Grove, and uh, took it back to Friendly Street Garage to have the transplant done, and it's a really good exchange. It turns out that uh, the Chevrolet V8, it was a 283 cubic inch engine, a very it's probably, I think, one of the better engines was available at the time, and it was very light. It was I don't think um, the engine weight, which could affect the handling of a car, was much different than the flathead V8.
Hmm.
And yet it was technically a much better engine. It was an overhead valve engine, and although a relatively low torque engine, and I was running the transmission and axles and all that were original Ford, and they're not really designed to take an awful lot of abuse from, say, some giant high torque engine. So the engine swap was really, it turned out to be quite a good, uh, quite a technically a success. Whether whether or not it was a good thing to do, that's another question. Some people would say it's too bad it doesn't still have the original flathead V8,
Hmm.
and they'd have a point. But I'm glad I did it. I guess overall,
Hmm.
that was a fun thing to do, uh, and and drove it ever since. And it's to this day, it still has that Chevrolet V8 engine in it.
Hmm.
So did that address the question?
Yeah, yes, it sure did.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
we're uh, we're getting close to 12 o'clock top ramen time. So you want I have a number of questions, so it would take a while probably for you to answer all of them. Should we stop the recording here and have part two at another time, or what? What? Or do you
We
want to
can
push
certainly do
on? Or
that. No, I think actually taking a break would be a good idea. And I'm delighted that you have some questions. I hadn't even thought about the Chevrolet engine, but that's in the wonderful world of the 37 Ford. That was a significant event,
yeah,
and um, but but yeah, I think maybe taking a break at this point, and and then maybe the next time we could do an interview, uh, we could talk a little bit more, whatever your questions are, and you might even think of some more while you're while we're waiting for this next interview,
yeah.
and I could move on to the maybe the go-kart or the Jaguar.
Okay, all right. So stop here is what you're saying, and then picking it up
Yes.
again. Okay. Well, I will
Yes.
stop it right now. Then it's
Okay.
roughly 30 minutes in.